Bonjour French 101 students, bienvenue au vidéo 8 du chapitre préliminaire. So I'm building a little bit more French there into our lessons. So in other words, welcome to video 8 of the preliminary chapter. We're almost at the end of the first chapter, just one more video to go and you'll have all the material you need for this first chapter. Okay, so the topic of today's lesson is des expressions utiles. So basically useful expressions. And you'll notice as we go through these that these are expressions that you would hear more often in a classroom, in a face-to-face classroom. And while it is true that we're not meeting each other in a face-to-face classroom, these are still expressions that will be useful if you go on with French in other settings in the future. So another thing that we can learn from this lesson is a certain kind of verb form, which I'm going to point out to you in just a second. Okay, so le professeur dit aux étudiants. So a couple of things to point out about this expression. So, le professeur, I'm sure you can guess that that means the professor. Notice also that this part of the word is in parentheses, and it means that it's optional. So I could actually just delete this and say, le prof dit aux étudiants. And that's just a shortened form of professor. And a lot of students in France or other French-speaking countries might call their professor that. Even sometimes in English, I've heard students say the prof instead of the professor. So, le prof dit aux étudiants. It's definitely less formal than saying le professeur. Okay, so we'll put back the whole word there. Notice that dit, okay, this is says. The T is silent at the end. So, le professeur dit aux étudiants, to the students. Okay, the X at the end of O, and O is simply a combination of a et le. So, a means to, le means the, or in this case it's actually les, because it's more than one student. A plus les equals O. So it's a contraction in French. It's almost like a math problem, isn't it? So, aux étudiants. And the X is pronounced in this case because étudiant begins with a vowel sound. Le professeur dit aux étudiants. So I will give you a chance to say this entire sentence yourself. Okay, now that you've had a chance to practice that, let's take a look at some of the verbs that we see. And verbs are just action words. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start highlighting some of these verbs in red. Okay, so we see ouvrez, lisez, fermez, écoutez, écrivez. So all of these are what we call command forms or imperative forms. And what it means is you're giving instructions to somebody or you're telling somebody what they have to do. So in a classroom, of course, a teacher will often give instructions or will tell students what they need to do to go through a lesson. So just to let you know what all these different verbs are. Okay, so this word ouvrez comes from the verb ouvrir. I'll put that in a different color. And that means to open. Lisez comes from the verb lire, which is to read. Fermer comes from the verb also fermer. It's just spelled a little differently. I'll tell you why in just a moment. Écouter comes from the verb écouter. Also pronounced the same, and it'll be similar for the last one. Oh, a little different for the last one. Let me move myself down a little bit. Okay, and écrivez comes from the verb écrire, to write. Okay, so all of these verbs you see here in blue are what we would call, I'll put that down here, infinitive verbs. An infinitive in English is just any form of a verb with the word to in front of it. So, to speak. Let me move this back just a little bit. Okay, so that's what we call the infinitive. And basically, infinitive just means that it's not conjugated. We're not adding a person in front of that and showing what that person is doing. So if I conjugate that verb in English, I would say I speak, you speak, he, she, it speaks, we speak, they speak. And in English, our conjugations are relatively simple. We don't have a lot of different endings on our verbs. The only different ending is adding an S to he, she, or it speaks. So conjugations are a little bit easier in English than in some other languages. In French, it's quite different though. When you conjugate a verb, there are lots of different endings. We won't get into the details of that just yet, but I at least want you to be aware of what an infinitive is and that it changes to different forms depending on what's going on. So in these command forms, the EZ ending is the formal ending, the vous ending. So if a teacher is talking to students, the teacher is going to use the formal form. There are other commands that are informal. We'll learn about those later on. But for now, just know that these are formal commands. Okay, so the teacher might say, ouvrez votre livre à la page 23. Oh, open your book to page 23. Okay, and notice votre, your, is also the formal form. Lisez l'exercice A. So read exercise A. Fermez votre livre. Fermer is to close, so close your book. Écoutez la question et répondez avec une phrase complète. So listen to the question and respond with a complete sentence. Notice the word phrase. This looks like phrase in English, right? This is an example of what we would call a false friend, which means that it's a word that looks like a word in English, but it's actually not the same word. It means something different than we would expect. Phrase is not phrase. It is sentence in French. So answer with a complete sentence. Okay. Écrivez la réponse au tableau. So write the response on the chalkboard. Tableau is a chalkboard. Looks a little bit like table, right? And a table is something flat that you put things on. A chalkboard is also flat. It just happens to be on the wall. Okay, so that gives us a good introduction there to some of these useful expressions. Okay, a few other ones we can learn about here too. So you see more command forms like prenez, faites, étudiez, and again faites. All right, so prenez comes from the verb prendre. Prendre means to take. So take or, grab your notebook, votre cahier. Okay, so the H is silent here. Cahier, du papier et un crayon ou un stylo. So take your notebook, some paper, and it's not crayon here. A crayon is a pencil. So it looks like crayon, but it's not. Another false friend. Stylo is a pen. So in this case, the teacher is asking the students to get a notebook, some paper, and a pencil. It's not letting me highlight here. There we go. A pencil or a pen. Okay, faites. And it is pronounced fête, not fate. It looks like fate, but it's fête. Faire. To do or to make. It depends on the situation. So, faites l'exercice A avec un autre étudiant. So, do exercise A with another student. Autre, another. Okay, and you see here it can be un étudiant, a male student, une étudiante, with the T pronounced at the end, a female student. Okay, étudier les mots de vocabulaire. So here we can also add the infinitive, étudier, okay, to study. Okay, étudier les mots de vocabulaire. So mots is words. Vocabulary is, of course, vocabulary, vocabulaire. So it's like the words of vocabulary. And in English, we would have a different word order. We would say vocabulary words. And you already know, faites comes from the verb faire, to make or to do. Okay, faites les devoirs en ligne. So do your homework online. Devoir also means to have to do something. The verb devoir, this can be a verb or it can be a noun. In this case, it's a noun. It's basically tasks that you have to do. Devoir means to be obligated, to have to do something. So les devoirs are things that you must do. En ligne just means online, on the internet. So this would be a good command for me to give to you as your professor. Faites les devoirs en ligne. Okay, so that's a useful one in our setting. All right. Now it's your turn to practice a few more of these. Okay, so you see the commands there on the left side in French. You see their translations on the right. And what we're going to do here is kind of practice with me asking you some questions and then you will give me some responses. So like we're doing for the activité orale, the first activité orale, I was asking you questions in red and then you gave me your responses, the blue parts. So we'll do something similar here to practice these useful expressions. First, of course, I'll go through and pronounce them so you can know how to say your part. Okay, so the first one is comment. Répétez, s'il vous plaît. Okay, that one you can just practice on your own. And it's just what? Repeat, please. Okay, vous comprenez? Oui, je comprends. Or non, je ne comprends pas. Okay, so here as you see, it is do you understand? Oui, je comprends. Comprend is understand. It comes from the verb comprendre. Non, je ne, and I'm gonna just underline this, comprends pas. Remember, when you put ne and pas before and after a verb, it makes it the opposite. It makes it negative. Je ne comprends pas. Okay, so if I ask you, vous comprenez, do you understand? You could answer either way. Okay, so I'll give you the chance to practice this one now. So I'm going to ask you the question and you can go ahead and choose one of those answers, either yes or no. And I would like you to speak these answers. Okay, vous comprenez? Okay, the next one you see here, the question I might ask you as your teacher, I might say, comment dit-on the homework en français? Okay, so the question I'm asking is, how do you say the English word homework in French? So, comment, how, dit-on, how does one say? So, on dit, one say. We've just reversed the order to make it a question. Okay, en français, in French. Okay, and you would answer with something like, on dit les devoirs. So, one says the homework in French, of course. So I'm asking you how to translate an English word to a French word, and you're giving me the answer in French. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you this question, and I would like you to give me the answer to it. Okay. Comment dit-on the homework en français? Okay, now let's take a look at the next question here. So, que veut dire votre? Okay, so in this case, que means what, veut means want, dire means to say, so it basically means what wants to say the word votre. In other words, what does votre mean? And so what does that word want to say, I guess is the way that you could translate that. Okay, so que veut dire votre? What does the word votre mean? And you could answer in two different ways. You could say, je ne sais pas. And what does that mean? The verb say comes from savoir, and it means to know. So you're basically saying, I do not know. Je ne sais pas, je ne sais pas. Or ça veut dire your. That wants to say your. It means your. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you that third question, and you can give me an answer to it. Que veut dire votre? All right, and finally, I can say to you merci or merci bien, and it just means thank you or thanks. And your reply could be de rien, and it means you're welcome. De rien literally means of nothing. So it's kind of like the English expression, oh, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. Okay, so once again, I'm going to tell you merci or merci bien, and then you're going to reply to me. Okay, merci bien. All right, and the last expression you see here is just a couple of ways of saying excuse me. One of those is pardon, and the other one is excusez-moi. You've heard of excusez-moi probably a million times in your life. We often use that in English as, when we're kind of exaggerating, excusing ourselves. Sometimes we say that. Okay, so that covers the topic of des expressions utiles. I hope it's helpful to you to practice these expressions and that they'll be helpful to you now or in any face-to-face class you have in the future. So, à bientôt!